The morning sunlight spilled into the penthouse on the 42nd floor, painting soft gold across marble floors and glass walls. San Francisco stretched below like a living postcard, the Bay Bridge glowing in the distance, the sound of the city muffled by double-pane serenity. It was a weekday, but inside the War Department, time seemed to hold its breath. Ethan Ward buttoned the cuff of his tailored shirt with mechanical precision. Every movement, the fold of the tie, the flick of the wristwatch, the way he adjusted his hair in the mirror, spoke of a man who had mastered the art of control. His reflection looked back at him, calm and assured, but the faint shadows beneath his eyes betrayed nights of restless thoughts. Behind him, Amelia moved quietly through the open kitchen, the scent of espresso floating between them. She wore a silk robe the color of champagne, her blonde hair pulled loosely into a bun, her face glowing in the soft light. She was beautiful in that distant, cinematic way, like someone who belonged to the world, not to one man. "Coffee?" she asked, not looking up from the espresso machine. He nodded. "Thanks." Their morning routine was choreography, flawless, efficient, and wordless. Two people sharing the same stage, but reading different scripts. They had learned how to exist together without colliding. Ethan scrolled through his phone, reviewing emails about a merger deal. Amelia was checking her calendar for an upcoming PR launch in Los Angeles. They spoke in passing, logistics, schedules, surface-level updates. Nothing more. "Don't forget dinner tonight, the Prescott Foundation Gala. You promised." "I remember," he replied. Or maybe he did, but part of him wished he hadn't. Those events felt like theater, champagne, fake laughter, perfect smiles. People who pretended not to know each other's secrets. Amelia placed his coffee cup beside him. "Wear the navy suit," she added. "It photographs better under warm light." Ethan glanced at her. "You mean it photographs us better?" Her lips curved into a faint smile. "That too." For a moment, their eyes met, a flicker of the old connection that used to pull them together effortlessly. It was gone just as quickly. She turned away to feed their cat, a silent gray Maine Coon named Oliver. They had been married 7 years, the kind of couple who looked perfect on social media. All curated trips to Napa, anniversary captions about love and partnership, and magazine-worthy photos from charity events. But beneath the filter, something vital had died quietly. The shift had begun small. Missed calls, shortened kisses, conversations that ended in polite nods instead of laughter. Ethan told himself it was the stress of work, 2 careers orbiting different suns. But deep down, he knew it was more than that. The warmth had faded, replaced by something polished and cold. At 8:10, Amelia slipped her heels on, grabbed her bag, and kissed him lightly on the cheek. Her lips barely touched his skin. "See you tonight," she said. "Drive safe," he replied. The elevator closed behind her, and the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Ethan stood by the window, staring at the city that once symbolized everything he'd wanted: ambition, achievement, arrival. But lately, it just looked like glass and distance. He thought back to when he and Amelia first met, a rainy evening in New York years ago. She was presenting a pitch to one of his firm's clients, her confidence electric, her voice sharp and alive. He had fallen for her ambition, for the way she spoke about dreams as if they were contracts waiting to be signed. Back then, they shared this same hunger to prove something to the world, to win. And they had won. The house, the cars, the vacations, the applause. But victory had turned them into strangers. Later that day, while sitting in his office overlooking Market Street, his colleague Mark leaned over the cubicle. "You and Amelia still the golden couple, huh?" he teased. "Every time I see your photos, I tell my wife to step up her game." Ethan forced a smile. "Yeah, we try." Mark laughed. "Man, I don't know how you do it. 2 high-powered jobs, all that attention. My wife would have killed me by now." "Balance," Ethan said simply, though the word tasted hollow. When he returned home that evening, the penthouse was dim, except for the city lights flickering through the windows. Amelia wasn't back yet. He loosened his tie, poured himself a drink, and sat on the couch. The silence was thick, the kind that doesn't comfort, but reminds you how alone you are. On the kitchen counter lay a single envelope with his name on it. Inside was a receipt for a $4,000 hotel charge dated 2 weeks ago. The name on the booking, Amelia Ward. He froze, reading it twice, his pulse rising, but his expression calm. He'd seen enough marital disputes in his law firm to recognize the signs. But this was different. This was personal. When the door finally opened around 10 p.m., Amelia walked in, her perfume trailing the faint scent of rain. She looked surprised to see him still awake. "You're home early," she said softly. "Yeah, cancel the gala. You didn't show." Her gaze faltered for a moment. "Something came up at work." Ethan nodded slowly. "At the Prescott Hotel." The silence that followed stretched too long to be innocent. Amelia's lips parted, but no words came out. She dropped her purse on the counter, her shoulders trembling just slightly. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel anger, just clarity. The illusion had cracked, and the pieces were sharper than he'd expected. He looked at her, calm and deliberate. He said quietly, "We built a perfect life, didn't we? Just forgot to live in it." She didn't answer. Outside, the city lights kept shining, indifferent, beautiful, and blind. And in that sterile silence, something between them finally broke. Morning arrived gray and heavy, with a low fog swallowing the skyline. Amelia stirred first, lying in the bed that suddenly felt too wide. She watched the ceiling for a long while before turning toward the other side. Ethan's half was empty, the sheets cold. He had left early. No note, no trace of warmth. She sat up, brushing a hand through her hair, feeling that ache in her chest that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite fear, something in between. It wasn't just the affair. It was the silence that had wrapped itself around their marriage long before she crossed that line. Downstairs, Ethan was already at the firm, pacing between glass walls and conference tables. His team discussed numbers and clauses, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying Amelia's face from last night, that flicker of hesitation before she lied, that tremor in her voice when he mentioned the Prescott Hotel. He wasn't sure what hurt more, that she had done it or that he had somehow known for months and done nothing to stop it. At lunch, his colleague Mark nudged him. "You okay, man? You've been staring at that contract like it's your obituary." Ethan blinked. "Yeah, just tired." "Take a vacation, go somewhere warm with Amelia, reset." Ethan managed a dry smile. "Maybe." But vacations didn't fix what was already gone. You can't resuscitate love with palm trees and cocktails when both hearts are already cold. That evening, Amelia met her friend, Clara Reynolds, a marketing executive, at a downtown cafe. Clara was the only person she could talk to, though even then, Amelia edited her truths carefully. "You've been off lately. Everything okay with Ethan?" Amelia hesitated, glancing out the window. "We're fine, just different lately." "Different how?" Amelia's lips curved into a practiced smile, the kind that women like her had perfected to survive polite society. "Marriage stuff, you know." Clara leaned back. "You sound like you're trying to convince yourself." Amelia exhaled awfully. The words almost slipped out. "I slept with my ex," but she caught them in time, swallowing them like poison. Instead, she said, "Sometimes I think we forgot who we were before we became the Wards. Everything we do now feels like performance." Clara nodded, sympathetic but distracted. "That's marriage, honey. You fake it till it feels real again." Fake it. Amelia hated how true that sounded. When she returned home, Ethan was in his office, sleeves rolled up, surrounded by paperwork. The glow of his computer screen painted his face pale blue. "You're still working?" she asked softly from the doorway. He didn't look up. "Always something to do. I thought maybe we could have dinner together. It's been a while." He paused. "I already ate." Amelia stood there for a moment longer, waiting for him to say, "Join me," or "Let's talk." He didn't. She turned away, walking into the silent kitchen where the city lights reflected off the glass like distant stars. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat at the counter. From where she sat, she could see his reflection in the glass wall, focused, unshaken, unreachable. It used to be different. He used to ask about her day, her clients, her ideas. He used to listen. Now their conversations were transactional. Where's the receipt? What's the plan? What's next? Everything efficient, nothing emotional. A few nights later, they attended a charity dinner. It was their first public appearance since the quiet fracture between them. To the world, they were still the golden couple. Ethan in his navy suit, Amelia radiant in emerald silk. Cameras flashed. Compliments floated around them like perfume. But under the table, their hands never touched. During speeches, Amelia leaned closer and whispered, "Do you remember our first gala? We couldn't stop laughing during the keynote because the host kept mispronouncing your name." Ethan nodded absently. "Yeah, I remember." His tone was flat, and she knew the memory no longer warmed him. After dessert, a man approached, tall, charming, the kind of man who smiled too easily. Lucas Bennett, her ex, the one she shouldn't have called that night. "Amelia," he greeted, his eyes holding hers for a second too long. "You look incredible." Ethan stood beside her, silent but alert. "Lucas," Amelia said quickly. "This is my husband, Ethan." Lucas extended a hand. "Pleasure. We met years ago, I think. Firm introductions at Prescott Holdings." Ethan shook his hand, firm, unreadable. "I remember." The air between them thickened, a triangle of unspoken truths. Amelia could feel her pulse at her throat. Lucas smiled politely, then excused himself. As he walked away, Ethan turned to her, voice low. "He's the one, isn't he?" Her breath caught. "Ethan." He didn't wait for an answer. "Don't bother lying. You're not very good at it anymore." She stared at him, eyes glistening. "Why are you being so cruel?" "I'm not. I'm just done pretending." They rode home in silence. The city lights blurred through the car window, streaks of gold and red cutting through the darkness. Amelia stared out, trying not to cry. Ethan looked straight ahead, his jaw tight. When they reached the penthouse, he walked past her without a word, heading straight to the balcony. The wind was cold, sharp against his face. Amelia followed, standing beside him. "Do you hate me?" she asked quietly. He took a long breath. "No. I hate what we've become." Her voice broke. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I just felt invisible." Ethan turned to her, his expression tired, hollow. "And sleeping with him made you feel seen?" She said nothing. The truth sat heavy in the air between them. After a long silence, he murmured, "You know what's sad, Amelia? I don't even feel angry anymore. Just empty." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't move closer. They stood there, side by side, like two strangers watching the city they once conquered fade into fog. Inside, their framed wedding photo gleamed faintly in the dim light. Two smiling faces frozen in a happiness that no longer existed. And as the night deepened, so did the distance between them, invisible but absolute, like a glass wall no one could break. The storm came on a Thursday night, one of those San Francisco rains that blurred the city into silver ghosts. The streets glistened under neon reflections, and thunder rolled faintly over the bay. Inside the Ward penthouse, everything looked serene. Candles flickering on marble counters, soft jazz humming from the Sonos speakers, and a bottle of red wine breathing beside two untouched glasses. Ethan had come home early, which was unusual. His schedule had become unpredictable lately. Late nights at the office, silent mornings, and dinners eaten alone. But tonight, he'd made a decision. Maybe it was foolish, but he wanted to talk, to stop pretending, to find out if there was still anything left to save. When the elevator doors opened, Amelia was already home. She sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, staring at the rain outside. She didn't turn when he walked in. "You're home early," she said softly. her voice calm but wary. Yeah, I thought we should talk. That sentence hung in the air like static. They hadn't talked in weeks, not really, just exchanges of necessity, like coworkers managing a failing project. Amelia turned to face him, her eyes tired. Talk about what? He hesitated. About us. She looked down at her hands. Her nails were perfect, as always, a soft blush color that matched the polish of her life. Immaculate, controlled, untouchable. But her fingers trembled slightly. Us, she repeated, almost as if testing the word's weight. I don't know if there's still an us, Ethan. He exhaled slowly. Then tell me. Say it out loud. Let's stop acting like everything's fine. Amelia stood, pacing toward the window. Rain streaked down the glass, distorting her reflection. Half her, half ghost. I don't know where to start, she murmured. Start anywhere. She turned then, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw the woman he'd fallen in love with. The spark in her eyes, the soft uncertainty. But then her gaze hardened, as if bracing herself for a fall. Ethan, she began, voice trembling, I slept with Lucas. The words landed like a blade, quiet, sharp, irreversible. For a moment, Ethan didn't react. The sound of rain filled the silence. He stared at her, his expression unreadable. When? He asked finally. 2 months ago. It was one night. It shouldn't have happened. He nodded once, mechanically, as if processing a data point instead of a confession. And the Prescott Hotel? She flinched. Yes.
Ethan crossed the room and poured himself a drink. His movements were slow, deliberate, the kind of calm that came after shock, not before it. He took a sip, then looked at her over the rim of the glass. Why? Amelia swallowed hard. Because I felt invisible. You were gone all the time, Ethan. You didn't look at me anymore. I was drowning in silence, and when Lucas showed up, he cut her off. So you thought sleeping with him would fix that? Her voice broke. No, it wasn't about him. It was about me. I just wanted to feel something again. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. And now? Do you feel anything? She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. Just shame. He set the glass down carefully, the sound of it against the counter impossibly loud in the quiet room. Then, in a tone almost too calm, he said, Then you owe me $90,000. Amelia blinked, confused. What? $90,000, he repeated. The amount I loaned you 3 years ago when your firm was collapsing. The one you promised you'd pay back someday. Consider tonight that day. She stared at him, stunned. You're turning this into a transaction? No, Amelia. You did. You turned what we had into something measurable. I'm just keeping the math honest. Amelia shook her head, trembling. That's cruel. Cruel is lying to someone's face every day while pretending to love them. Cruel is letting them believe the life they built still means something. She stepped closer. Ethan, please. I know I've hurt you, but it wasn't about money. It never was. Everything's about money. You and I both know that. It's what we built our lives around. Deals, loans, appearances. The only difference now is that I'm finally charging interest. Amelia covered her face with her hands. The weight of his words pressed down like concrete. You're not the man I married, she whispered. He turned away. Maybe I never was. The storm outside grew louder, wind rattling against the glass. For a moment, it felt as if the entire city was holding its breath with them. Amelia finally spoke, her voice fragile but determined. I'll pay you back, every dollar, but you should know that money won't heal you. He glanced at her, his expression distant. I'm not trying to heal. I'm just trying to make sense of the damage. They stood there, Two people surrounded by everything they'd ever wanted, yet completely hollow inside. The penthouse that once felt luxurious now looked sterile, like a museum for things that no longer mattered. After a long silence, Amelia whispered, "Do you still love me?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked out the window, watching the rain trace endless lines down the glass. "I don't know," he said finally. "I think I love who you used to be. Or maybe I love the idea of us, the one we sold to everyone else." Her tears came harder now, her breath shallow. "Then what happens next?" Ethan picked up his briefcase, the sound of its lock clicking shut like punctuation. "Next," he said quietly, "we stop pretending." He walked past her toward the elevator, pausing only once at the door. "You can send the check to my office," he added without turning around. "Consider it closure." The doors closed behind him with a soft chime, leaving Amelia alone in the flickering candlelight. The storm outside was relentless now, sheets of rain crashing against glass, thunder echoing through the sky. She sank to the floor, her reflection warped in the marble, her hands trembling around the stem of an untouched wineglass. The city kept shining, indifferent, uncaring, as if mocking her with its brightness. And for the first time in her life, Amelia Ward, the woman who could spin any story, control any narrative, realized there were no words left to fix this one.
When Emma's words left her lips, "I slept with my ex last night," the silence that followed was deafening. The air in our living room turned heavy, suffocating. The city lights flickered through the window, but all I could see was the reflection of a woman I no longer recognized. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't even breathe. My mind struggled to process the words that had just shattered the illusion of our life together. She stood there, arms crossed, like she was waiting for me to explode. But no explosion came, just stillness. Maybe she expected screaming or accusations. Instead, I only managed a hollow whisper. "Why?" Her lips trembled, but her voice was steady. "Because I felt like you stopped seeing me." That line hit me harder than the confession itself, because deep down, there was some truth in it. We'd grown distant. Her late nights at work, my focus on business trips, the quiet dinners filled with scrolling phones instead of conversation. But betrayal was something else entirely. I stood up and walked toward the kitchen. My hands were shaking as I poured myself a glass of water. Every sound seemed amplified, the drip of the faucet, the ticking of the clock, the pounding in my chest. "Who?" I finally asked, though I already knew the answer. Her ex, Daniel, the same man she once swore had broken her beyond repair, the man I helped her forget, the man I thought she had buried in her past. Emma looked down. "It just happened. We met for coffee and..." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Coffee. That's what they all say, right? It just happened over coffee." She didn't respond. Tears welled up, but I wasn't ready for them, not now. I couldn't stand the sight of her pain when she was the one who'd caused mine. I walked out of the kitchen, grabbed my coat, and said the first thing that came to mind. "Congrats, Emma. You just earned yourself a $90,000 love bill." It wasn't rage, it was sarcasm. Cold, sharp, deliberate. My brain went into business mode, the only place it knew how to function when my heart was breaking. That $90K wasn't just a random number. It was the cost of every dream I'd built for us. The house down payment, the savings, the vacation plans, the little things I'd put aside thinking we were working toward forever. When I walked out that night, I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. The next morning, reality hit like a freight train. My phone buzzed endlessly, Emma calling, texting, begging me to come home, to talk. But what was left to say? The trust we'd built over 7 years had evaporated in a single confession. I drove aimlessly for hours before ending up at the lake, the one where we used to spend summers laughing under the stars. The water was calm, mocking me with its stillness. I stared at my reflection, wondering how everything went wrong. I replayed our relationship like a movie in my head. The first date at that tiny Italian restaurant, her nervous laugh, the way she used to look at me like I was her entire world. I remembered the night we signed the lease for our first apartment,
when she said, "We're building our future." Now that future felt like a distant dream. 3 days passed before I went back home. When I opened the door, the house was spotless, but too quiet. She was sitting on the couch, wearing one of my shirts, her eyes swollen from crying. "Ethan," she whispered, as if saying my name would fix everything. I walked past her and set my keys down. "I'm only here to pack some things." She stood up quickly. "Please, just listen. I made a mistake. I know you hate me, but please don't walk away like this. We can fix it." I turned to face her. "Fix what, Emma? The lie? The image? You didn't just sleep with someone else. You destroyed the foundation we built." Tears streamed down her face. "I didn't mean to hurt you." I took a deep breath, fighting the urge to shout. "You did hurt me. You made a choice, Emma, and choices have consequences." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small envelope, the kind you'd use for an invoice. Inside was a handwritten note. $90,000, the cost of loving someone who forgot what love meant. I left it on the table. She looked at it, confused, but I didn't explain. That wasn't the point. The bill wasn't about money. It was a metaphor, a line in the sand. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had thrown away. As I turned to leave, she whispered, "Is this really it?" I paused at the door. "No, Emma, this was it." And then I walked out. For real this time. That night I stayed at a cheap motel on the edge of town. The room smelled like old cigarettes and regret. I lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever sleep peacefully again. In the silence, memories came rushing back. Her laughter, her perfume, the way she'd rest her head on my shoulder. Every memory was now poisoned with betrayal. I wanted to hate her completely, but my heart was stubborn. It still remembered the woman I thought she was. For the first time, I realized that love doesn't die in one moment. It fades, painfully, like a wound that refuses to heal. By the end of the week, I met with my lawyer. Divorce wasn't just an emotional decision, it was a financial one. And if she wanted to play games with hearts, I'd make sure she understood the cost of breaking trust. When I left the lawyer's office, I finally felt something close to peace. Not because the pain was gone, but because I had taken control of it. The fallout of her confession wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the beginning of a reckoning. Little did she know, the real price of betrayal hadn't even begun to unfold.
The morning after I filed for divorce, the world looked colder. Not different, just stripped of color. Even the sunlight that crept through the blinds of my motel room felt artificial, like it was trying to convince me that things were normal. But nothing was normal anymore. My wife, ex-wife-to-be, had burned the bridge between us, and all that was left was smoke, ashes, and the faint echo of her lies. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about saving anything. Not the marriage, not the image, not her reputation. I was thinking about something else entirely. Balance. She had tipped the scales, and I was going to make sure she felt the weight of it. Retaliation wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about clarity. About letting her see that actions, no matter how passionately justified, carry consequences. 2 weeks after the confession, I returned home, not to reconcile, but to collect the rest of my things. The house smelled faintly of her perfume, that same scent I used to love. Now it just reminded me of the night she admitted everything. Emma was there, sitting at the dining table surrounded by unopened mail and half-eaten takeout. She looked smaller somehow, like the guilt had been carving pieces off her each day. She tried to smile. "Ethan, maybe we could just talk, please?" I didn't respond. Instead, I set a leather folder on the table and opened it, revealing neatly printed documents. "We will talk, but through these." Her eyes scanned the papers, confusion spreading across her face. "What is this?" "Divorce terms and an invoice for damages." "Damages?" she repeated, her voice cracking. "Emotional, financial, and reputational. I valued our marriage like I'd value a partnership. We built this life together. You chose to dissolve that partnership without consultation. So yes,
Damages. She stared at me like she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. Maybe she didn't. I wasn't the Ethan who used to bring her coffee in bed or leave notes on her mirror. That man died the night she said I slept with my ex. "I'm not signing this," she said finally. "This is insane." "Then don't," I replied, picking up the folder. "But keep in mind, your company's board might be interested in hearing about the affair with your ex. One of your vendors, wasn't he?" Her eyes went wide. "You wouldn't—" "I would," I interrupted softly. "Not because I enjoy hurting you, but because you need to understand that betrayal doesn't just stay between two people. It ripples. It reaches everything." She broke down crying, but I didn't move to comfort her. My empathy had limits now. In the days that followed, I started rebuilding, not just my life, but my sense of self. I poured my focus into work, hitting new deals, expanding my portfolio, and securing contracts I'd been too distracted to chase before. Ironically, success came easier now. Pain has a strange way of sharpening you. But every time I saw her name flash on my phone, I felt that familiar ache. Sometimes I almost answered. Almost. Then I'd remember her words, "I slept with my ex last night," and the temptation would vanish. A month later, she showed up at my office. My assistant buzzed me with hesitation in her voice. "There's a woman here. Says she's your wife." I told her to send her in. Emma walked in wearing a gray coat, hair tied back, eyes red but determined. "I just need 5 minutes," she said quietly. I gestured for her to sit. She didn't. "I've signed the divorce papers," she said. "But please, Ethan, don't ruin me professionally. Don't tell them about Daniel. It'll destroy everything I've worked for." I studied her face for a long moment. She wasn't wearing makeup this time. No pretense, just raw fear. "You mean," I said slowly, "the way you destroyed what we built?" Her eyes glistened. "Yes, I know. I deserve that, but I'm asking for mercy, not forgiveness." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then I leaned forward and said quietly, "You won't lose your job, Emma, but you'll lose something else." She frowned. "What do you mean?" I opened a drawer and slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check. Her name on it. $90,000. She looked up, confused. "I told you that your betrayal came with a $90,000 love bill. I'm paying it." Her mouth fell open. "You're paying me?" I nodded. "Because I want this chapter closed. You can cash it, burn it, frame it. It doesn't matter, but when you see that money, I want you to remember what it cost both of us. That's not payment. It's punctuation." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "You're a cruel man, Ethan." I smiled faintly. "No, just finished." She left without another word. That night, I poured myself a drink and stared at the city skyline through my window. For the first time, I didn't feel angry. Just empty. Revenge hadn't healed me. It had just cleared the debris. But in that emptiness, there was something liberating. Retaliation wasn't about making her suffer. It was about reclaiming control over my story. For months, I'd been reacting to her choices. That check? That was my full stop. 2 weeks later, an unexpected package arrived at my office. Inside was the check I'd given her, uncashed, and a note in her handwriting. "You were right. Some debts can't be repaid with money. I'm sorry." I held that note for a long time. No tears, no relief, just a strange calm. Maybe in her own way, she finally understood. In the end, my retaliation wasn't the destruction of her life. It was the preservation of mine. I walked away with my dignity, my integrity, and a hard-earned lesson. Sometimes closure doesn't come from forgiveness or revenge. It comes from balance. And balance, I realized, is the most expensive currency of all. The weeks following the finalization of the divorce were a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and late nights at the office. My life had become a series of numbers, deals, and contracts, a world I could control,
unlike the chaos Emma had left behind. Yet, even amid the steady rhythm of corporate life, a quiet tension lingered. Something unsettled had begun to stir in the shadows of her disappearance from my daily existence. It started with an email. No subject, no sender listed, just a cryptic line, "You might want to see this before it's too late." Attached was a PDF titled Blackwood Acquisition Agreement. I hesitated before opening it, aware that curiosity could be dangerous. But the name Emma Ward jumped out at me in the first paragraph. She was listed as a silent partner in a new venture, a startup poised for a high-profile merger. For a moment, I felt a flicker of surprise, and then a jolt of anger. She had moved on, not just emotionally, but financially, building a future she had no right to while attempting to erase the past. The betrayal was no longer personal, it was strategic. I forwarded the document to my attorney, Mark, asking him to analyze it before I contacted anyone. By the time he called me back that evening, the rain had started again, tapping against the office windows in a rhythmic, ominous pattern. "Ethan, this is significant," Mark said, voice low. "Emma isn't just investing. She's structured her share so that she has leverage over the board if anything goes wrong. If this merger closes, she could profit handsomely, and not just financially, she could influence decisions that affect multiple companies, including yours." I felt my jaw tighten. So she's still playing the game, even after everything. Mark didn't answer immediately. "She's always played it. But here's the kicker. There's a clause granting her confidential control over some assets. If we move carefully, we could counter her position. But you need a strategy, Ethan, a quiet, precise one." It was tempting to act impulsively, to call her directly, to confront her. But I knew that impulse was a luxury I couldn't afford. Any misstep would expose me emotionally and professionally. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control. And control required patience. The next day, I arranged a meeting with Lucas Bennett, the man whose memory had haunted Emma's orbit as business advisor to Blackwood Ventures, which made the stakes higher. Surprisingly, he agreed to meet at a discreet cafe downtown, away from prying eyes and cameras. "Ethan," Lucas greeted me with a tight smile, "I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "Likewise," I said. My tone was cool, detached. "I hear you're involved in Emma's new venture." He leaned back, studying me. "I provide guidance, that's all." "Guidance that could affect multiple stakeholders," I replied, keeping my voice measured. "Careful, Ethan, you're treading into complicated territory." "Good," I said. "I like complicated." Our conversation ended without resolution, but I left with a clear understanding. Emma had entered a battlefield, and I needed to know every move she intended to make. This wasn't personal, it was strategic, and I would not let her gain an advantage simply because she was my ex.
Over the next week, I assembled a small team of trusted advisors. Every clause of Blackwood's agreement was scrutinized, every potential leverage point cataloged. My goal was not to ruin her, but to ensure I was never blindsided again. In a way, it was a lesson I had learned too late in our marriage. Emotion and business cannot mix. Then, one evening, I received a text from Emma herself. "Ethan, I hope you're not trying to interfere with Blackwood. We've both moved on. Let it go." I stared at the message. Her tone was firm, yet faintly pleading. The audacity and the subtle undercurrent of fear was remarkable. I didn't reply. Instead, I drafted my response carefully, each word measured for maximum clarity. "I'm not trying to interfere. I'm making sure you can't hurt anyone, yourself included, through recklessness. Consider this my courtesy." The next morning, I filed a legal motion to formally clarify my stake in related ventures indirectly affected by Blackwood. The move was subtle, almost invisible to the public eye, but it secured my position. Emma would be aware, and that awareness alone would influence her decisions. The climax of this silent battle came 2 weeks later during a confidential board meeting. I attended remotely, disguised under a secure connection, watching as Emma presented Blackwood's growth strategy. Her confidence was palpable, but I noticed subtle hesitation when she addressed certain clauses she now knew I had legally secured influence over. Her eyes flicked momentarily toward her phone, as if sensing my oversight. For the first time, I saw vulnerability in her posture. Not regret exactly, but the sharp awareness that the game she thought she controlled was shifting. I didn't gloat. There was no need. The point had been made. Control was no longer hers alone, and the power she assumed she wielded was tempered by unseen hands. That evening, as I poured a glass of scotch and looked out over the city, I felt a strange sense of closure. The secret deal had revealed more than just financial leverage. It had illuminated the nature of our relationship, the boundaries that had been crossed, and the strength I never fully recognized in myself. Emma's betrayal had forced me to confront not only her duplicity, but my own blind spots. I had allowed trust to become naivety, love to become assumption, and silence to become complicity. But now, with careful planning and strategic foresight, I was no longer a passive participant in my life. The city skyline shimmered in the night, indifferent yet steady. I knew that Emma would continue to navigate her ambitions, that she might find success and recognition, but I knew that I had established the parameters of our future interactions. She could no longer manipulate or deceive without consequence. And for the first time since the confession, I felt a quiet, unshakable calm. The past had been acknowledged, the present controlled, and the future, whatever it held, was mine to navigate. The secret deal wasn't just about Blackwood ventures or financial leverage. It was about reclaiming agency in a life that had been upended by betrayal. And as I sat back in my office chair, the faint glow of city lights reflecting off the glass, I realized that sometimes the most powerful victories are silent, unseen, and undeniable. The chessboard was set, the pieces moved with deliberate precision, and I, finally, was in control.
It all came crashing down on a Thursday evening, the kind of evening that begins quietly but ends in a storm. I had returned to the penthouse, now emptied of shared memories, but still echoing with them. The city lights outside shimmered like fractured glass against the rain-soaked windows. Inside, silence had settled like dust, thick and unrelenting. Emma had shown up unannounced. Her sudden presence wasn't shocking, it was inevitable. She had tried to rebuild her life, maneuver her deals, maintain appearances. But tonight, all her composure had dissolved. She stood in the middle of the living room, her coat damp from the drizzle outside, hair clinging to her face. The once bright woman who had commanded boardrooms and social circles now seemed fragile, unmoored. Her eyes I knew like the back of my hand, flicked toward me, searching for something. Forgiveness? Validation? I couldn't tell. Ethan? Her voice was small, almost timid. I didn't respond immediately. The air was heavy with unspoken words, memories, and betrayal. Instead, I walked slowly toward the kitchen counter, set down my glass, and leaned back against the marble. The room felt unreal, like a theater set with all the wrong props. Finally, I said, "Why are you here?" She hesitated, fidgeting with the strap of her damp bag. I needed to see you, to talk, to understand what we lost." A bitter laugh escaped me. Understand? Emma, do you think a conversation will undo 2 months of lies, betrayal, and deceit? Do you think words can erase the nights I lay awake, wondering if every moment with you had been a lie?
Her shoulders slumped. No, I know that. But I need to try. The vulnerability in her voice struck me unexpectedly. It wasn't an apology, at least not fully. It was desperation. And yet, I couldn't allow it to soften me. Not now. I crossed the room slowly, keeping my tone measured. You came here because you wanted closure for yourself, not me. Don't mistake that for concern. Her lips quivered. Maybe, but I need to see if there's anything left. Anything at all. I stopped inches from her and studied her. The woman who had once been my partner, my confidant, the person I loved beyond reason, now stood before me like a stranger wearing a familiar face. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to demand that she explain, justify, beg. But the calm I had cultivated over weeks held me steady. Instead, I asked quietly, "Do you remember why this started to fall apart?" She nodded, her gaze dropping. Because we stopped communicating. Because I felt invisible. Do you understand now that betrayal is not communication? It's a weapon. And you aimed it at the one person who trusted you blindly.
Tears streamed down her cheeks, her mascara smudging into dark trails. I know. I hate myself for it. Every day. And yet... She paused, searching for words. I can't take it back. I can't undo what I did. I never asked you to. I asked for honesty, loyalty, love. And when you took those things away, you also took us. She pressed her palms to her face, shaking slightly. The human fragility she displayed was overwhelming. It was a reminder of what had been, of the intimacy and trust we had shared, now shattered. I wanted to hurt you, she whispered, almost inaudibly. I wanted, I don't know, attention? Control. I just wanted to feel alive again. Her confession wasn't cathartic. It wasn't redeeming. It was just another layer of pain. And for the first time, I realized that no amount of rationalization could protect us from the human impulses that had destroyed everything. I shook my head. You think this explains anything? It doesn't. It just proves that you put your desires above everything else, above love, above commitment, above decency. She flinched, but didn't leave. She couldn't. Something about the way we were intertwined still held her in place. I don't know how to fix it. I don't even know if it can be fixed. I let out a long, controlled breath. Fixing it isn't possible, Emma. Not for what we had. You made that choice, and now you have to live with the consequences, just as I will. The storm outside had intensified. Rain lashed against the glass, and the wind rattled the windows. It was almost as if the city itself reflected the chaos inside the room. She took a hesitant step toward me. Please, tell me something. Anything. That there's hope, that... I raised a hand to stop her, though not in anger. There's no hope in this. Not for us. Not as we were. You can't take back the past. Her shoulders slumped further, and she sank to the floor. The vulnerability was complete now. No bravado, no control, no pretense. Just the raw aftermath of mistakes. I didn't move closer. I didn't speak. I simply watched, feeling a hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't the love that hurt. It was the recognition that what we had built was gone, that intimacy, trust, and shared dreams could be so completely dismantled by a few decisions, a single night, a single betrayal. For a long time, we sat in silence. The storm our only companion. The breakdown wasn't loud or cinematic. It was quiet, subtle, suffocating. The collapse of a life shared, the erosion of trust, the shattering of illusions, all unfolded in the space of a room punctuated only by the rain and the occasional sob. Finally, I spoke. Get up, Emma. You need to leave. This isn't a scene for dramatics, it's real life, and real life doesn't give second chances for what you've done. She obeyed silently, moving to the door. She hesitated, her hand on the knob. Will we ever talk again? I didn't answer. Not because I couldn't, but because the answer was irrelevant. Our connection had been severed. What remained was nothing but memory and consequence. She left. The door closed behind her with a soft click, and the apartment felt colder, emptier than before. The storm raged outside, but inside there was an unexpected calm. A reckoning had occurred. No words, no apologies, no confessions could restore what was lost. The breakdown had stripped everything down to its essence: truth, responsibility, and the impossibility of undoing certain actions. I sank into the couch, staring at the city lights. The rain mirrored my own inner turmoil, relentless and unyielding, but perhaps, in its persistence, also cleansing. In that quiet aftermath, I realized that breakdowns aren't just endings. They are revelation. And sometimes, revelation is the first step towards understanding, even if understanding doesn't bring healing.
The weeks after the breakdown were strange in their quietude. The apartment, once alive with shared routines and laughter, remained cold and empty, yet no longer suffocating. Emma's absence had left a void, but it was a void I had slowly learned to inhabit, not with bitterness, but with deliberate focus. For the first time in months, I felt the contours of my own life without her interference, without the weight of betrayal pressing down on every decision. The divorce was finalized in early December. Papers signed, signatures verified, and the courthouse echoing with sterile formality. Emma had moved on with a quiet efficiency that mirrored the meticulousness with which she handled her new ventures. Blackwood Ventures had secured a modest but impressive acquisition, and I had verified through my contacts that she was financially stable. Her empire, small but growing, yet carefully constrained by the checks and balances I had put in place. The day the divorce became official, I woke earlier than usual. The city skyline shimmered against a winter sun, and for the first time I walked through the morning streets without the weight of expectation pressing on my shoulders. There was no exhilaration, no triumphant victory, just a subtle relief, an acknowledgement that a chapter had closed. I began to focus on myself. Old ambitions that had been sidelined for the sake of our life together resurfaced. I took up projects I had shelved, reconnected with friends I had neglected, and even returned to the gym with a diligence I hadn't known in years. The physical exertion helped, yes, but the real work was internal, reconstructing trust in my own judgment, learning to rely on my instincts without being clouded by emotional attachment. Emails from Emma occasionally appeared in my inbox, professional in tone, never personal. Her messages were transactional, polite, sometimes apologetic. I answered when necessary, but always with restraint. There was a strange civility to it, a mutual understanding that while we were no longer partners in life, we could coexist in the world of commerce without unnecessary conflict. One evening, as the first snow of winter began to fall, I sat in my apartment, reviewing the final financial reconciliations of Blackwood Ventures. The storm outside painted the streets in white, muffling sound and creating a serene isolation. I realized I no longer felt anger when I thought of Emma. The raw sting of betrayal had dulled into a measured awareness. The lessons were numerous and subtle. Trust must be earned continually. Love without boundaries can become naive, and actions, even those cloaked in passion,
carry consequences that ripple far beyond the immediate moment. But perhaps the most important lesson was personal. Resilience is forged in the quiet aftermath, in the choices one makes when the world seems to have collapsed. A month later, I received an unexpected invitation. It wasn't from Emma, but from a mutual friend, a mediator of sorts who had known us both before the unraveling. They suggested a neutral meeting over coffee, not for reconciliation, not for negotiation, but simply to acknowledge closure. I agreed. When I arrived at the cafe, I saw her immediately. Emma sat by the window, hands wrapped around a warm cup, eyes focused on the falling snow. She looked different, softer perhaps, but with the unmistakable edge of someone who had survived storms of her own making.
She looked up as I approached. Our eyes met, and for a moment there was silence. No resentment, no pleading, just recognition. Two people who had shared something profound, and yet who had been irrevocably changed by it. "Ethan," she said finally, voice even but not detached. "I wanted to say thank you for holding me accountable, for the $90,000 lesson." I allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. Lessons are rarely comfortable, but they're necessary. She nodded, looking out the window. "I've made mistakes I can't undo. I can't ask for forgiveness, but I hope you found peace." "I am. Slowly, but I am." We spoke for an hour, not about love or betrayal, not about past mistakes or future grudges, but about life and its ongoing motion. The projects we were pursuing, the people we were meeting, the small victories and disappointments that made existence tangible. Conversation was civil, grounded in reality, free from the heavy weight of emotional entanglement. By the time we left the cafe, the snow had stopped, and the streets glimmered in a quiet white light. We walked out separately, acknowledging each other without attachment, without expectation. The closure wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even cinematic. It was deliberate, functional, and honest. Back in my apartment, I reflected on the months that had passed. Betrayal had cut deep, leaving scars, but it had also forced growth. I had reclaimed my life not through revenge or manipulation, but through strategic thinking, emotional control, and the courage to face painful truths. The $90,000 love bill had been more than a symbolic gesture. It had been a framework through which both of us could understand consequences. Emma had experienced her own reckoning, I had taken mine. And now, in the aftermath, we had both emerged. Scarred, yes, but capable of moving forward without destruction. I poured a final glass of scotch, holding it up to the city lights. A toast not to love or revenge, but to clarity, agency, and resilience. Sometimes the greatest victories are not loud, not visible, not celebrated. They're quiet, internal, and profoundly transformative. And in that silence, I found peace. The past could not be changed. The betrayal could not be undone. But life and its inexorable forward motion still offered possibilities for growth, for renewal, and for a version of happiness built not on illusion, but on truth, self-awareness, and the hard-earned wisdom of experience. I set the glass down and watched the snow drift past the window, understanding at last that resolution wasn't about erasing pain. It was about embracing it, learning from it, and moving forward with dignity intact. The story ends not with reunion, not with vengeance, but with mastery over self. The betrayal that once seemed insurmountable became the catalyst for transformation. And as the city below settled into its quiet, wintered rhythm, I realized that life's most meaningful resolutions are those we craft for ourselves, deliberate, sober, and unshakably our own.